Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. This is a very special episode on a number of different fronts. First and foremost, because we have the glorious return of Scott Schulte. Round of applause, Scott. Good to have you back. It's been too long. I know we've I don't know if you've been listening to the show or not, but we've been teasing your return for really a couple months now. Seriously, I'm being serious. We have. So I'm very excited to have you back. And before I ask how you are doing, I thought this was kind of cool. I told you about this before we took the air. I found out that today was basically the kind of the birthday of the show, the 3-year birthday of the show. Started in training camp, right before training camp 2016, and here we are 3 years later, and you're still with us. God bless you for it. How are things, my friend? Catch us up. What's new?
Things are pretty good. It's interesting because I took a year off pretty much this month last year. So I'm kind of following the medieval crop rotation, I guess, 2 years on, 1 year off. So
there you go.
Kind of what I'm doing with the show. But things have been good. Family's been good. Been doing vacations. I think I mentioned right before we left off a year ago that my son is into trains. So pretty much every vacation the last 2 years has been train focused. Hence the cool. If no one knows what Chessie is, I was a train company. It no longer exists.
Okay.
So he's been very influential in getting me into trains. But I guess from what I hear outside of train circles, it's football's around the corner. So, and I assume we're talking about football and not trains. So I will try to change gears if I can.
Change gears. I like it. Well, we are talking about football. I wish we were sitting here talking about trains. I know nothing of trains, unfortunately, but it's great to have you back, man. I hope, like I've been saying, I hope this is at least somewhat regular. And if you are able to ever join us on, especially now that training camp is warming up and the season is around the corner, if you ever want to join us on our weekly show or anything else like that, you are more than welcome. I'll keep in contact with you, and it's great to have you back. We're gonna center, at least for now, we're gonna center this primarily about fantasy football. I think we're gonna go kind of macro, talk about fantasy football strategies, maybe hone in on the Bengals front. And we can when we get to the Bengals, I would like to get a tiny bit of your ideas of all the changes that have gone on with the Bengals in terms of coaching, and get your kind of take on that. But let's kind of start. You are the resident fantasy football guy. There are a lot of fantasy football players who watch this show, who tune into this show. And, I think over the past couple of years, we've had people take your advice. So we wanted to start with that. Did you win your league last year? I hope you say yes as we kick this off.
I'm not as much of the expert as I used to be because I lost in my championship game last year. So okay. I'm now down below 50%. I'm now down to 48%, I think, of the leagues I've been in where I've won the title. So I'm now down below 50%.
Uh-oh.
So not as good as I was last year. I think heading into last year, I was at 50% of the ones I'd won. I lost the championship game in my main league last year, so now I'm down below 50%. So if I lose credibility from that, then that happens.
Well, that's okay. It happens to the best of us. But where I kind of wanted to start with that is, what were some of the strategies you used last year? And do you think that some of that will translate? Are those still strategies you can use this year, you think, to be successful? Either all of them, some of them? What's kind of your take on both of those areas?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone has their own strategy, and some work better than others, and some, work more some years than other years. I guess the 2 or 3 main things I'd say I would do. One, because I harped on this a lot last year, and I'm going to, I guess, start off the show with that this year, is never draft the defense high. And you can go back to the videos I was going to say tapes, but we're beyond tapes, a year ago. And I was trying to say, don't draft Jacksonville. They had a whole bunch of defensive touchdowns. That stuff's not repeatable. You look at defensive from year to year. And so that was one strategy. It was obviously don't draft the defense high. That's a very high turnover position, and that proved to be this year. I mean, Jacksonville was horrible. I think you saw a lot of new teams because it's all defensive touchdowns. The other thing is you can wait on quarterbacks. I got very lucky. I drafted Luck kind of late, and that worked out pretty well. And you look at the top 6, scoring quarterbacks this past year in fantasy, it's guys like Mahomes, Roethlisberger, Matt Ryan, Andrew Luck, Watson, guys who weren't drafted that high. Those weren't the first 6 quarterbacks taken. And so that too, you can wait and you do it smart. You're going to get your guy. And the third thing is, if you have a plan or a strategy, and I tend to have one, it's that I, have followed for many years that I've developed, and and the main thing is staying true to it. It's basically drafting the best guy available. Not a big fan of like, I have to take, running back, quarterback, or, running back, whatever. Some feel like go by position, and that's kind of drafting by need, I guess, equating it to the NFL draft. And it's like, well, no, if you kind of have to look at how many points you're projecting these guys to get, and you're trying to optimize at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who you have. You're trying to get the most points at the end of the year. And you just need to, for where you're picking at whatever number, this combination of guys is going to give you the most points. That's kind of what you have to do. If it's a stealer, then okay, that sucks, but it's a steal. If it's a second receiver before your, second running back, then okay, that's, so that's part of it too, is, trying to get past that human element and just looking at it as a numbers thing. Because if you're playing for money, and generally, so if you're playing for money, you want to win the money, and you have to kind of follow the numbers and not, it's kind of fun to say, hey, I got my guy, or I got 3 Bengals, or I got whatever. And yeah, it's nice if you want to be able to watch and root for certain players. But if you're trying to win that money, it's it's kind of like stocks or anything else. You're trying to maximize your chances and your profitability.
To further the point I made earlier about not feeling bad about your championship, in the live YouTube chat, we have Buckeye_76 say, I missed the playoffs by 0.1 points. Would have gotten second had I gotten in. Lost out for dead last. Wow, that is man. And he's a Bengals guy. That's man. You may want to rethink the football. Well, he's a Buckeye guy, I guess. So I mean, at least he's a little happy on that front.
And and I still remember this. It's amazing the kind of crap you remember. Well, can I say the stuff you remember? You can edit that out later.
Crap's fine.
And this was like a decade ago. I lost out in the championship game because of Michael Pittman. There was one game, middle of the season. He was a backup running back, I think, for the Buccaneers at the time. The guy I was playing against had a horrible team. He had to start him because he had no good players. The starter for the Buccaneers got hurt. Pittman went wild, had like 2 or 3 touchdowns, 150 total yards. That guy beat me by like a point. And I had a crappy game, so I lost like 80-79 or something. Ended up first in the league in points, but 5th by record because of that game. Missed the playoffs. The next few weeks, my team was scoring 100. Would have easily won the whole thing instead of finishing 5th place and got nothing. So I know exactly what.
Terrible. Well, kind of moving on to another facet here. I mean, there's been a lot of movement around the league, especially from stars, and usually when a player moves, teams, it's not just that player's production that's potentially affected especially when it comes to fantasy football, but it's also, if it's a receiving option, it also affects the quarterback potentially. So, I mean, there's kind of there's 2, I guess, that I was mostly looking at. For years, Tom Brady has been a point machine, and he's done it without a lot of wide receiver weapons, but he has lost a guy that has put up a ton of touchdowns over the years for him in Rob Gronkowski, who retired. So how do you see that relationship working? And then, of course, this being a Bengals podcast and the national headlines that were grabbed this week as the Browns open training camp, how do you see the OBJ Baker Mayfield relationship potentially working out? Do you think that they're going to explode through the roof in terms of stats and fantasy points, or is Brady going to be able to cope without Gronk at a high level? What's kind of your read on those relationships?
I'm going to say, and granted, anyone watching for fantasy, I'm going to say, we're in the end of July. Take everything with a grain of salt until about the final week of training camp from anyone, even the paid people. I mean, everything they say is only as good as that week. So as training camp and things happen, it's definitely beneficial to reevaluate. So based on where we're at this point in the schedule, as camps are just opening up, I really don't think the Gronk, I mean, obviously the Gronk thing is going to hurt Gronk's stats. I mean, his numbers are going to be way down this year.
You think?
But they were down last year too. I mean, he was hurt quite a bit, and he's one of these guys that's kind of like a healthier version of Eifert, but great when he's on the field. But last few years, he hasn't been on as much. Last year was down a bit, and Brady was still Brady, even with Gronk missing quite a bit. And that seems to be the thing with the Patriots that I think is so aggravating to fantasy players, is they reinvent themselves pretty much every single week. Where this week, it's the Rex Burkhead week. The next week is the Sonny Michel week. The next week, we're just going to throw it to whoever we want to throw it to. We're going to, our fourth receiver is going to get 15 passes his way. They just do that. And I think they're still going to do that. They still have the versatile running backs. They still have they don't have that stud, Randy Moss wide receiver that's going to get 18 touchdowns, but they're going to have those guys who they can plug and play. They can tweak their offense to look different. And I think at the end of the day, Brady's still going to produce. Their offense is still going to produce. I mean, last year early in the season, everyone's saying, "Oh, their offensive line is injured. They have no one to play offensive line. They're going to be horrible. Gronk's getting hurt," and they still win the Super Bowl. So clearly, the Patriots are going to Patriot, and Brady. I mean, he's going to get his numbers. So that one, I don't see being as much of a downer on his numbers or even on their whole offense as others might. The Odell Beckham thing's very interesting because if you look at it, he's going to a better situation. I mean, the Browns, I think, have a better line than the Giants have. Manning's an older quarterback. He's getting near the end of his career. Baker Mayfield had a, very nice rookie year last year. There's all the high pay, got this great offense. I've got these, good running backs, with Kareem Hunt and then the younger players. And they have a nice young core, I think. So that bodes well. The one thing I see if I was looking at the numbers, and which I haven't yet, I'd say he probably doesn't produce as high, only because I think what he has around him with guys like Landry and Njoku are better than what he had with Shepard and Ingram. So I don't think he's going to be the sole guy. Hey, it's offense. Everything goes to him. We don't have a running game. We don't have a second option. It's just, you chuck the ball to Odell Beckham, you chuck it to Odell Beckham. Now you have options. Now you have a quarterback that can run. So you're going to probably lose a couple of touchdowns. He's just going to run it in. Or, you have Chubb there. You have Kareem Hunt. You have, a better tight end. You have a better second receiver. So I think he's still going to produce. He's still going to be a great player. He's going to get good numbers. I just don't think he's going to have enough opportunities to, be that, number one or number two. He's still going to be one of the top probably 10 or 12 receivers, but probably not as high. Just because he's going into a bigger pond, I guess you could say. He's going to be surrounded by more people who are better players, better caliber players that are going to also be able to produce. And the Browns are going to, and if the Browns do the right thing and try to spread it out, which is good for their team, it kind of makes you want, okay, so halfway through the year, let's say Odell Beckham's looking at his numbers and saying, hey, wait a second, why am I not, first in the team in all his categories? Does he get upset? And does that lead to some strife? And then does he get a little cranky and become more of a diva, and granted, that's all hypothetical. But so to answer your question, I'd say Brady's still gonna be Brady. Beckham's gonna be Beckham, but I don't think he's gonna be the Beckham to the level people expect. And just because I think they have enough options that if a team, if they play the Bengals like saying we're gonna take him out, they don't have to force feed him. They can throw to Jarvis Landry. They can run. I mean, they have these other options.
Yeah. Carl Eskins in the live YouTube chat says, I think the Browns are going to be a huge drama like the Steelers were last year. I think that's definitely the hope when it comes to a Bengals perspective, that's for sure. And speaking of a Bengals perspective, I want to get your read on that. Before we do, I just want to remind everybody we're speaking with Scott Schulte, longtime contributor to this show. It's great to have him back. He's talking a little fantasy football with us. This is the time of year, aside from training camp starting, that people and leagues are starting to kind of gear up, and people are starting to get their strategies for fantasy football and hopefully make some money. Hopefully Scott and his sage advice will help you to do that. we'll be talking with him throughout the season for fantasy football advice and some other Bengals topics as well. You can get this show, in case you're new to it, you can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Google Play, on Spotify. You can get it on the Megaphone platform. It's also on YouTube, and all of our stuff is on cincyjungle.com. So we thank Scott for coming on the show here. Let's talk a little Bengals before we get out of here, especially from a fantasy football perspective. There was a question in the live YouTube chat that we'll get to in a second. Well, I guess it kind of ties into what we're going to talk about, because really there's the trio of skill position players, and then there's Andy Dalton that you want to look at from a fantasy football perspective, and you look at all of it because of Zach Taylor and his supposed bringing in of the Rams type of offense. It was Dave Lennox in the live YouTube chat who says, is Joe Mixon a viable RB1? Last year, he kind of proved that, especially with a lot of weapons out, and he kind of being the focal point towards the end of the season. Your thoughts on him being an RB1, your thoughts on really those other guys, A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, Andy Dalton, and their point values going forward. Boyd being especially intriguing now that he's coming off that big contract extension he just signed.
Yeah, man. I really, I mean, as far as talent, Joe Mixon is clearly an RB1. I mean, I think we've seen enough. I mean, if you go back and watch his days at Oklahoma, you watch, the stuff he does to get even the 2-yard carries, the amount of work and the amount of people he makes miss, just, to turn a 3-yard loss into a 1-yard gain. I mean, he is a very talented football player, catching the ball, running the ball. As far as, talent goes, I'd say he's definitely an RB1. If you look at, if we would have had this podcast 2-3 weeks ago when we had Jonah Williams at left tackle, presumably Cordy Glenn at left guard, Bowling probably maybe at right guard or somewhere. You have a improved offensive line at that point from what you had last year. And if Taylor can make the offense any better and get out of the kind of this vanilla predictable thing they've been doing for the last few years, then Williams is a very viable pick as an RB1 because he's got the talent. He's got the improved offense in theory. He has an improved line. Now we're looking at, Jonah Williams is out for the season. Bowling obviously just retired. This line's arguably worse than it was last year because Glenn, he will get hurt at some point. They don't have Bowling to slide over at left tackle when he gets hurt. You now have to plug Westerman.
They got Andre Smith now.
And I know a lot of fans are big on Westerman, and if he's good, okay. If he becomes league average, you basically just replace Bowling, so you're not really gaining anything there. You're down depth. You have to hope that Price goes from horrible to just below average, or maybe even average or good. So there's it's one of these things where if you're an optimist, and you could argue, well, if you've been someone's been a Bengals fan since the 90s, you have to be an optimist, I guess. So if you're truly optimistic and you're going to bet red on roulette 10 times in a row and get it, okay, then you can hope and this line's going to be at least serviceable. And I think that's the biggest challenge with Mixon is you have to hope and pray that they figure something out on the offensive line. And I think we'll probably see that in the preseason games, probably in that third, a little bit in the second, mostly in that third game. Can these new coaches who are all, very new to everything they're doing and new to this team, can they do enough to get, because I think Mixon's clearly going to get the touches. The question is, are these touches, the kind of touches that Lamar Jackson gets in Houston where it's 2 yards a carry and, okay, you're getting 250 touches and not doing anything with it? Or are they going to be, the touches from someone who's going to be able to turn these into 5-yard gains and, crank out, 10, 12 touchdowns and get 400 receiving yards and a few. So I think that's the big question. I really want him to be an RB1. And I think I don't know. I have a hard time saying for sure he is, just because I'm so worried about the offensive line as much as I don't want to be. And then I'll mention the other two real quick. I'll turn it back over to you. On the receivers, I mean, AJ Green. He's a stud. He should be in the Hall of Fame when he's done. He is still a very elite player. He does have injured. He does get hurt, but he's still a great player. I think he's, at the end of the day, he's going to be a good receiver. Obviously, we're drafting, higher up in the first few rounds. Boyd, he's obviously very good. And I went back and looked, so I was kind of curious. Okay, well, Green missed a bunch of games. So is Boyd's production just because Green was out? And what you see is Boyd produced when Green was in, and he's kept producing when Green was out. Ross was the one who was kind of the big person that sucked up all the production when Green was out. So I think Boyd's going to be good. I think Boyd's going to be worth it. I think Green's going to be worth it. I really want to say Mixon's going to be. I mean, I love watching him play. I just don't want to say that and then just see him, get one of these, 20 carry, 30-yard. We're old enough to remember the 90s when these guys were struggling for every yard they got. And I just have this horrible feeling in the back of having lived through that this may, I sure hope it doesn't, but yeah, I'm not really optimistic until I see what they start doing in training camp.
To kind of wrap it up a little bit, what about there was a question in the live YouTube chat kind of talking about it was Master MG saying, I'm curious how much Zach Taylor can help Dalton. What do you think of, Dalton to me, when I play fantasy football, usually I'm like, hey, I've kind of filled out my roster, last one or two picks. Usually he's there and I'm like, hey, I'll take him. And I've used him before and he's actually put up quite, depending on the year, he's put up a decent amount of points. He's been a good spot starter. This is a big year for him in his career and where it's going to go after 2019. But do you see the Zach Taylor effect really kind of sprinkling the magic dust on Andy Dalton this year and being a viable fantasy quarterback? Or is it the same kind of strategy, free agent guy, spot starter? That's who he is at this point.
I think, and this is just my opinion, I think if Zach Taylor has the magic potion for quarterbacks, this is probably not the year we're going to see that. And only because, Dalton, historically, we've seen enough of him. You have a good idea who he is. He tends to struggle when there's pressure, and this offensive line is definitely not a great offensive line by any stretch of the imagination. So I think there's going to be a lot of running away, a lot of sacks, a lot of injury potential, just like last year, and a lot of throw the ball away. So I just don't think he's going to have the opportunity. You look at the Rams last year. Okay, Jared Goff, he had a great year, but look, he's behind a very good offensive line. The Rams were really smart. They really went after last year. They put a lot of money and a lot of draft picks in trades and in signing to try to build a team for last year, and that worked really well. Got him all the way to the Super Bowl. I just if next year, let's say Williams is back, Jonah Williams, and let's say Price takes a step forward, and let's say they can fix some things in the offensive line. Let's say they actually add someone in free agency above league minimum, one of those. And let's say they kind of do what the Rams did. When you go back a couple years ago, the first thing the Rams did was added a center and added a left tackle, and all the rest was history. They all of a sudden they went from, there are things they did too, like Sue and Zerpa, but that's what you need to see. And I think the Bengals tried to do that. They added Jonah Williams. They took a lineman last year in the first round. Unfortunately, with the injuries and everything, I just don't think this is going to be the year to see that turnaround. So if you're drafting Dalton, I'd say kind of what you said, more of a free agency. He'll probably be available as a waiver pickup or a ad drop. Unless you want to be that eternal optimist and say, screw it, I don't care about the line. This guy is just going to be so good. He's going to become Aaron Rodgers and can play behind the worst offensive line in football and still, throw 40 touchdowns and 5 interceptions.
So what are you looking forward to the most in Bengals training camp? What are you looking forward to seeing in terms of position battle or anything like that?
I guess the biggest thing I'd be curious about is, because I think our defense is better than they looked last year. And I really want to see, kind of the offensive line and defensive line and going head to head. You got guys like Glasgow's back. I think, Billings is in another year. He was drafted really young. I've always been high on him. I think, he's had another year to kind of progress and learn. Sam Hubbard was good. They still have Willis as depth, Geno Atkins and Dunlap. So you have these really good core defensive guys. And you have this offensive line who I just spent the last 20 minutes dogging. And so I guess the question is, when these two units go head to head, that's, that'd be the biggest thing is, do all the reports from training camp basically say, the defense won the day, the quarterbacks are throwing picks, the quarterbacks when it's time to throw, or do you see, wow, they're actually figuring things out. Maybe Westerman, is good, or maybe as good as the fans have said he is. Maybe Bobby Hart was worth the signing. Maybe these guys I brought in from Buffalo, or maybe Billy Price isn't that horrible. Maybe it was the pec injury, and so I think for me that's the biggest thing, because we know the skill players are all good. We know Dalton is who he is. We still know they have no linebackers other than the guy that Pratt, who they drafted. So I think the biggest thing for me is can this offensive line stand up? And I think the Bengals front seven I think is a good test to see. Yeah, can this line stand up? Are they going to give Mixon a place to run the ball, and are they going to give Dalton more than 2 seconds, or is it going to be last year where he's so banged up we're bringing in Driscoll or Finley or whoever they decide to bring in after that?
Yeah. Well, good stuff, Scott. Appreciate you joining us. Let's make this a regular thing, maybe a couple times a month or so, especially as fantasy football season gets started. Appreciate your insight for those joining us live, or for those of you joining us after the fact. If you are new to the show, you can get it, as always, on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Google Play. You can get it on the Megaphone platform, as well as on YouTube and CincyJungle.com. Scott, training camp's upon us, my friend, and like I said, it was the perfect day for you to join us on the show's third birthday.
I think the biggest thing I just want to make sure I say before we end this segment is, you mentioned the third year, the third birthday. I think a big, round of applause or congratulations, or all the people on the cyber, in the cyber world, if you can clap your laptop or whatever, for Anthony Cosenza, because you've been with us for 3 years. Every week you've been cranking these out. You've been setting them up. You've been getting guests. You've been, getting people like me to show back up. You've been dealing with all the different people we've had, the different co-hosts and everything. So you've done a great job running it. So yeah, I think you deserve a lot of credit and congratulations for everything you've been doing for it.
Oh, thanks, bud. It's a labor of love. And what's kind of cool is, yeah, I mean, you mentioned guests and all that stuff. We had like Tyler. What's really cool is when you see Tyler Boyd get a contract, and then a few months earlier we had him on the show, interviewing him and stuff. I interviewed him twice, which was really cool. And at the time, he had said, we talked about this with John on the weekly show, but he had said at the time he really wants to stay in Cincinnati, and lo and behold, he does. I don't know, that kind of stuff's cool. But I appreciate the compliments. You are always welcome on this show. I'm glad you were able to make it back. Let's do more of these. And like I said, any other additional contributions you want to make to the show, man, it's always welcome. But thanks for coming on. Thanks for those of you who tuned in live. And if you, next time we do this with Scott, if you have more questions, we answered a couple of them here. If you have more questions, fantasy football focused or otherwise, as we take these questions, definitely shoot them our way, and we will do our best to address them. We'll see you next time. This has been the Fantasy Football Insider on the Orange and Black Insider with Scott Schulte. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We'll see you next time.